Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and it's upon our ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built, and we share our own knowledge, teaching, learning and research practices within the university. And may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodian of country. Okay, so let me welcome Julie, Adam, Kurt and John to this last session. It's a 1 hour session. I'm going to start off with Julie, if that's okay. And just, so we have all our EDs today, plus John Nelson talking, which is wonderful as a commitment to this, what's been a great 2 days on TDM. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think we've all benefited as we'll get to enjoy this last session, which hopefully will add more value, and I'm sure it will. So Julie, over to you for 5 to 10 minutes to just make a few introductory remarks on issues that are top of agenda for you in the TDM space.
Sure, thanks David. Hi everyone, my name is Julie G. I'm the ED for Transport Strategy. So I sit in the CST division. So my team is very much about the longer term thinking. So we sort of focus on longer term strategy development, as well as the tools and frameworks that we need to develop to support longer term implementation of strategy. So in my team, currently we're reviewing future transport. So the future transport strategy was released. We're currently doing a refresh on that. It was brought forward a bit because of recognition of a whole range of things that have happened with natural disasters and so on, and COVID, and looking at sort of how do we leverage some of the newer thinking that's been happening in government related to sustainability, for example, the new electric vehicles policy. How do we bring that all together in terms of where we're going in the future? So in terms of that sort of work that we're doing at the moment on future transport, TDM is a really big topic for us. Obviously, COVID has been this amazing experiment in travel demand management, and who would have thought, you know, a couple of years ago that we could ever be in this point where basically everyone who can work from home is working from home. So for us in future transport, we're wanting to look at how we can potentially pick up on some of the positives in that, but you know, knowing how much of the existing travel patterns will continue is you know, open for discussion. And I know David and the team at ITLS have been doing a lot of research in that space, and they're thinking maybe a 20% reduction potentially. So I guess for us, that TDM piece is really important in terms of changing travel demand. But I guess in terms of where we're looking at it in terms of future transport and where we're going as a longer term strategy out to 2061, is that we're giving it a bit of a sustainability and a bit of a livability lens. So from a perspective of, you know, we've got a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. Right now, transport as a sector is not going to achieve that. Transport as an agency and the fleet that it owns and operates will achieve that. We've got things in place like the zero emission buses. We've got, we're looking at hydrogen trials. You know, Sydney Metro is, you know, is carbon neutral. We're looking at doing that for Sydney trains and so on. We've got new regional rail fleet that is bi-mode, so it will operate on electricity and diesel. So we're getting towards better in terms of our own emissions, but but we're only 6% of the transport of the whole of the emissions that happen in the state. So there's a whole lot more that we can influence too. So we're looking at things related to reducing the need to travel, so encouraging movement, you know, towards peaks, out of cars and so on. But we're also looking at you know, benefits related to, you know, getting your life back by not sitting in traffic jams. You're having that sort of, I guess, broader thinking, using your time more productively, as everyone's seen, working from home. Those that can are saving a lot of time in their day. Many of them are putting it back into work hours, but some of them are sort of putting it back into their broader, I guess, life, work-life balance. So for us, we're thinking about sustainability, that livability message, And also thinking forward into that longer term future with the advent of the technology coming on board related to things such as connected and automatic vehicles. How do we make sure that we as an agency make sure that public transport or mass transit in whatever form it might be, or shared transport, does the heavy lifting? How can we make sure that it's not about everyone owning their own cab, it's about everyone sharing cabs and or using public transport? And, you know, the longer distance journeys continue to be done by mass transit, and shared sort of point-to-point type services support that model. So again, it does have a sustainability lens and a livability lens, and there's sort of some of the things we're thinking about, as well as a focus on more local living. So whether how that might play out in terms of less need for massive infrastructure, and more investment in more local living. So doing what transport, more local living, supporting councils to improve walking and cycling, working with Department of Planning on improving tree cover, which makes places more attractive, reducing speed limits, and those sorts of things. So I guess they're the sort of key things that we're thinking about at the moment in our future transport refresh or review, the draft of which we're just about to put a silver version out for consultation in the cluster at the moment, and to a few key external stakeholders. The draft for public feedback will go out in November, and the final version will be released in March after going through Cabinet. That will be, we're releasing it at the same time as the State Infrastructure Strategy from Infrastructure New South Wales, and also the update to the Greater Sydney Region Plan. So all three of those plans will be in alignment, released together as they were in 2018. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Julie. Right on time. And it's really nice to see that sustainability has been added to with livability. I think that's really encouraging and important, especially for rural regional settings in particular. Right. Adam, are you okay now to say a few words?
Yeah, sure am. Actually, the first thing I had was also sustainable travel, sustainable practices. I think one thing that I've really noticed and really top of mind, and Susie and the team are probably sick of me saying this, is that if I reflect on maybe 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, the team was really staunch advocates for trying to do the 4 Rs that Susie talked about earlier: the retime, remode, reduce and remove. And we really had to have a really strong level of advocacy and drive to get people engaged. We were rolling a metaphorical stone up a hill. And what COVID put the stone over the other side of the hill, and it was running away down the other side. And you know, as like all great disruptors, right, it changes thinking and changes the way people look at things. And suddenly a lot easier to get audiences with people. Suddenly a lot easier for people to understand why you might want to relieve pressure in a particular point of the public transport network. Yes, it was physical distancing that made it real for people, but the problem had always been there. The problem being peak hour congestion that Julie talked about, or overloaded train services where you stand shoulder to shoulder, you know, Tokyo subway style. We always had those issues emerging in Sydney, you know, especially over the last 10 years. And what the COVID experience did is I gave people somehow a new lens through which to see the problem and to understand and engage with the potential solutions. So that's been, for me, when I think about some of the potential sustainable travel benefits, there's this change in, I think, the accessibility of people's thought towards sustainable travel. I can walk and cycle to work when I'm only going twice a week, or I can make a lot more of my local trips on my bike because I'm in my local neighbourhood a lot more. So I do think that's been a really important piece. The other thing for me, where I think there's an area of great opportunity, is what I think about as kind of institutional or systemic barriers to retiming trips and remoting trips. Retiming in particular, when I say institutional barriers, that might be a harsh term, but I think about the typical one is school starting hours. There's been this kind of long-held desire, I think in many parts, people say, well, let's just change the time we start our schools. And bingo, we take away all the congestion problems around schools.
Wow.
Yeah, on face value we do, but there's industrial mechanisms that we would need to overcome with the education system. There's service level issues for ourselves. We would need to redesign school services into a different time of the day, and that's actually not as simple as it sounds. There's not a fleet of buses that sits around and does a school run and does nothing else. Those buses are woven into our everyday background services that people operate. So things like being able to, or being more prepared to try and overcome some of those systemic or institutional barriers. Universities, lecture times, evening lectures, day lectures, how we time our days through lots of our institutions and businesses is really an area of opportunity, I think, as we move forward. And then that starts to bleed into, this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but it's into the planning world about changing the use of floor space somewhere. And maybe the school analogy is a good one. How do the neighbours feel about a school when the school bells are ringing at 7 a.m. or 6:30 in the morning? Or how do people feel about living next to a TAFE when traditionally it's busy at 3 till 7 in the afternoon, all of a sudden it's busy in the middle of the day or at different times. So, and that's just the noise aspects. There's obviously also access changes and a whole raft of, I guess, planning considerations that would need to sit behind changes in use. I don't know where these things will land, but I think what we have now is the opportunity for these potential changes that go beyond transport, but that significantly can improve transport. The conversation and the policy decisions to be had. So I think that's kind of top of mind for us at the moment. You're on mute, David.
11.
I'm not sure where the interference is coming from, but somebody is hacking in and talking to a little boy or girl. So I do apologise. It's gone now. I'm not sure if it was in Adam's home, but that's okay.
It may have been.
No, it's all right. We did get the story, and thank you very much for that. I didn't want to stop you because it was good. Okay, Kurt. Well, Kurt's joined us for this session, and we've known Kurt for a long time in his various roles. And if you want to introduce yourself, Kurt, and just talk about the space which you're responsible for and how it might link to TDM. And as I said, I have some good questions for you later from some of the participants.
I look forward to that, David. Thanks so much. And thanks very much for the introduction to speak today. I think I know some of you, but for those of you that I don't know, my name is Kurt Brissett, and I'm the Executive Director of Connected Journeys at Transport. I head up a relatively recently formed team at Transport, and what we did in customer strategy and technology was that we, in order to, I guess, support our one of the strategic themes that sort of underpin Future Transport 2056, which is to really foster connected and personalised journeys for our customers. We created a Connected Journeys team, which in technology and innovation effectively brought together all of the technology enablers in order to facilitate a seamless plan, book and pay experience for our customers across both public and private forms of transport. So what we did was rather than looking at sort of technology in a siloed fashion, we really began to look at it through the lens of what our customers are desiring and how can we make interacting, I guess, with our services a simpler and more convenient thing for our customers. So my substantive role, I've worked at Transport for coming up for 6 years now. I formerly headed up the ticketing team at Transport, so I looked after all things Opal and contactless payments and the like. So, but now I look after essentially all of our digital products and services that our customers interact with, which is great because it's really enabled us, I guess, at Transport to really start to look at how technology can be a real enabler for helping to manage things such as TDM. It's certainly been something that we've leaned on during COVID, where obviously it's been very challenging in terms of how we communicate with our customers and how we can advise them of what things such as the impacts to our services may have been, or how we communicate things such as dynamic timetable changes, which have been enacted over the last few months. And so it's really sort of given us, the opportunity to think a little bit differently about how we can approach technology as an enabler for that. And really, I think one of the big things that we certainly were working on prior to COVID, but I think it's going to become even more important in a post-COVID world, is how we can essentially stitch together the respective modes of transport that are under a Transport for New South Wales umbrella, but also in terms of how we interact with the private transport service community as well, so that we can ultimately bring things together and provide a mobility as a service style experience for our customers. We've been doing a number of trials in that space in order to better understand what our customers want as it relates to MAS, and ultimately how we can make it more convenient for them to ultimately leave their car at home and take a multimodal journey in order to get from point A to point B. Over the last probably 2 to 3 years, there's been a real focus on developing a platform in transport, which is known as Opal Connect. And effectively, it's a platform that we've been progressively building out with the intent of being able to essentially provide our customers with that single mobility account experience through which to plan, book and pay for a myriad of different transport services. And we originally launched, I guess, the first incarnation of Opal Connect in regional New South Wales, where we basically used it to trial whether or not we could provide school kids in Kiama with the ability to interact with a ticketing system, so as to provide them with provide us with improved data as it relates to patronage, but also to provide the school kids and the operators with a better customer experience. So that was our first foray. We learned a lot, and that solution ended up evolving into a frictionless RFID bag tag solution, which we ended up then expanding out to Narellan, and which is being used by the Bus About service out there. So kids now can attach an Opal bag tag to their bag and walk on and off in a frictionless way, and we're accurately picking up that patronage, because that's a real pain point. Now, I guess that's part of the TDM conundrum that we've often got as transport administrators, is the fact that we don't always have an accurate view of the patronage, of the demand for our services out there. And school kids patronage is one of those big pain points for us, because school kids, for those of you that have got school kids, they're notorious for not tapping on and off, and that gives us all types of challenges as it relates to knowing just who's using what. So this is a way that we look at technology in an innovative way to try and overcome this type of challenge. It has continued to evolve, I guess, Opal Connect, and we've used it since to provide customers with a way to access all of our on-demand transport services that we've contracted, and customers can use their Opal Connect account to now sign in to all of these different transport planning apps that the on-demand operators have got, and then automatically use Opal Connect as their preferred payment method. And we receive the transactional data that relates to those services, and we aggregate it in our Opal Connect back office, and effectively we then reward customers by providing them with the travel credit if we can see that they've transferred with an Opal service, as a means of trying to encourage and incentivise that connected journey type behaviour. So that's been really successful. On one of the operators, for instance, this was before COVID, we actually saw a 40% increase of the patronage that was being seen on one of those services, just by virtue of providing a better technology experience, but also providing a bit of a reward to adopt that type of customer behaviour also, which was great to see. We're also using Opal Connect for a number of other things. We launched an Opal digital card trial in December of 2020. And effectively what that was about was we were looking to provide customers with a digital version of the current Opal card. Opal as a brand is trusted and well loved by a number of people throughout New South Wales. So we wanted to essentially provide customers with a similar experience as it relates to the pricing proposition, but give them the convenience of being able to use their digital wallet and be able to enable them to use their phone or their watch to pay for public transport. But the point of difference for this type of product was the fact that effectively it's a prepaid debit card that's Opal branded, and it's linked to a customer's Opal Connect account. So it's powered by our back office. And it's got the ability then to be able to be used to facilitate payment on private transport services that accept credit card payments. So in a way, it's a bit of a data play in a fairly integrated way. It doesn't require private transport operators to install hardware or contactless payment terminals, and it enables us to have a better appreciation of what a customer's end-to-end connected journey behaviour is, so that we can incentivise the type of behaviour that we're looking to. We're doing a lot more in that space. I won't labour on it. Perhaps there's some questions on it. I know Dave put his hand up. You might have a question on that, Dave. You're on mute.
So David,
you're on mute. Sorry.
I'm unmuted. So I was just saying we'll just finish off soon. And there'll be plenty of time for questions, although when you mention a 40% increase, historically I've seen that where it's because before we never counted it very well. Now we're doing a good job, as distinct from there's a genuine 40% increase in bums on seats.
Yeah. I mean, the figures were coming, I guess, directly from the operator themselves, who were keeping a good view of the patronage. But I think it very much depends on the use case. But it was just interesting to see how pricing in this instance had a material impact, and was obviously a bit of a lever for some customers to adopt that type of connected journey behaviour.
Okay, well, we might just move on, Kurt, and I'm sure we can have some questions for you. And I'm going to now invite John. Thank you for that. That was great. John, if you could just 5-10 minutes on whatever you want to talk about in this space.
Just a few comments. Thank you very much, David. Really, a few thoughts around different aspects of public transport, and particularly planning for sustainable public transport in, and whatever phrase we've alighted on, living with COVID or the COVID normal world. I think we heard quite a lot, actually, in the very local context from Adam in the session this morning about what has happened to public transport patronage in the Sydney area, and that reflects experience worldwide, doesn't it? That a lockdown cuts your public transport patronage, takes away at least 80%, if not more. So one of the things that I'm very concerned about is ensuring that we bear in mind, a bit of the old adage that great cities have or should have great public transport services, and I think I would extend that a little bit further given the context of these 2 days, to say that great TDM measures should be enabling citizens to have access to good awareness and good quality information to enable that sustainable travel choice decision making. I think it's important that we have at least been reminded during the pandemic that public transport is an essential service. The wheels have continued to turn, albeit with much reduced patronage, but it has helped to keep the city and the region moving from the perspective of essential workers. And clearly that's a good investment and a good reminder as to why we use public money to finance public transport services. But looking to the future, and that future is very, very near, isn't it? As we begin to open up, we have something of a glimpse already as to how we may need to revise some of our public transport services. I think the public in particular now have a revised perception of what acceptable capacity is in our ongoing Australia-wide surveys as part of the iMove Working from Home project jointly with Transport for New South Wales has been including a number of questions about attitudes towards public transport, and particularly the biosecurity concerns and the concerns over crowding. And the biosecurity one is something that is proving to be fairly enduring, and this of course extends into other shared modes as well. So what does this tell us about the future? Well, maybe we do need a more customized offer, a greater assurance where we can of being able to physically distance, and that of course is where the various modifications to journey planning apps has been particularly important. Certainly in areas of low demand, and I think of on-demand services, an area where I have a particular interest. One of the many attractive features is actually the ability to book ahead, to confirm your seat, and indeed to have that guaranteed. We used to say your guaranteed space would be your seat, but at the moment it needs to be space around your seat as well. So I think a greater focus on personalisation of the transport offer and how that and how public transport can embrace that, I think is important. A very refreshing feature of the last 2 days is to have seen so much discussion around active modes, and also to have seen that quite a lot of our discussion has embraced aspects of regional and rural transport provision as well. It's time for more, not less, joined up, integrated transport. I know that's a very old idea, and one that is always difficult to implement in practice. But the role of active modes in contributing to in first last mile connectivity, and including in that the e-mobility solutions is something I think we can build on more, given that there has unquestionably been hopefully more than short-term focus on active modes, and we were hearing from Mark Ames just beforehand how that's manifested itself in Macquarie Park. And finally, we have these more, perhaps more discerning customers. I'm thinking of the public transport users. They're perhaps in the current normal more adaptable, linking with changing practices, working from home, studying from home, spending more time in the local neighbourhood. But perhaps through that adaptability, we may all be becoming a little more less predictable in some of our travel choices, which again I think makes it important that people do have a choice. They do have a sustainable choice, where so far as is possible, and getting the information to make those help us all make those choices would seem to me to be one of the the key front of mind activities for TDM professionals at this moment. And I'll stop there, David.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, that's good because we've covered a half of the 1 hour, so we have half an hour for questions. And there's just a couple of phrases that have come up in the last 2 days as I asked the very first question, and that is a strong interest, a growing interest on social exclusion and well-being. Very, very strong, almost more important in some senses than sustainability. And I think the other one that's really important is the increasing focus on the regional rural settings, and that there are huge opportunities there. So I'm going to start off by asking the questions, and they were given to me in advance, and I'm not going to go through my presentation from yesterday, which was a starting point for a whole list of questions. And I've arranged the questions in an order in which we would give the opportunity for each participant to actually hear their question and chip in if they so wish. But in the interest of time, I'm going to paraphrase them. And if the question is not asked correctly, then please chip in and help me. But in asking the question, I might nominate who could answer it to start off with from our 3 panelists or 4 panelists today. So Sophia Grieve, you've got the first question, and it's on regional TDMs, which I think is appropriate. And during the course, we've heard a lot about access to public transport needs to be created in regional areas for non-drivers, and the population is aging. So Sophia's question is it feasible to have a TDM strategy for the state of New South Wales, ensuring that there is public transport access by 2031 in all regional areas? I might start off with Julie on that one.
I thought you might. Look, I think that's a really good question, Sophie. So before I sort of took on the role that I am in now, I did work in sort of the rural and regional space, and sort of worked in the transport planning and also actual service delivery in that space. So I think I have a personal interest in transport disadvantage and lack of choice. So for a lot of people regionally, there is no choice. The only choice is I drive or I stay home. And I think, we are trying a whole different range of ways to address that. So certainly on-demand trials regionally have been extremely successful in places like Moree, where we've replaced scheduled services with an on-demand service. There's been a big uplift in usage. We've also extended hours to reflect that people do want to travel, 7 days a week. And at different times than we would normally traditionally provide, and rather than being dictated by school timetables. And in regional New South Wales, that is a real challenge. The school timetable or the school travel is 95% of the bus use. So the timetabling for regional services is dictated by the school needs. So there really is big gaps in the day. So I think in terms of some of the work that we're doing in strategic transport planning, so we, as I said, we sort of do that longer term planning. So we're doing work at a regional level. So we're working with Department of Planning on 9 different regional transport plans. And for each of those, we're looking at the local conditions, the local services and infrastructure that are already there, and looking at how things such as TDM could be applied in particular locations. So we've just recently done one for the Illawarra Shoalhaven. So, the Illawarra Shoalhaven's a pretty big place. So in some parts of it, Wollongong obviously has the potential to look at TDM, whereas other areas, it's actually, can we actually get a service? That's sort of the thing. And I think part of where we're going is moving to sort of different sort of types of potential contracting models. So looking at contracting models like we have in Newcastle, where there's one operator that provides a whole range of different services, so that on-demand services are integrated with scheduled services, that are integrated with, ferry services. So looking at a broader piece of how we provide services. There's also a whole lot of, in a lot of regional places, community transport is the only public transport, as well as potentially some taxi services. So, there has been trials of using community transport operators to provide broader service, to take it away from that eligibility requirement that typically community transport has, to broaden it out to provide more of a service. So there's the scheduled services that were replaced in Moree with a community transport type service. It's basically community transport, but for anyone. But it gives you that certainty, that pre-booked certainty that it's going to be there when you need it. And it's that choice thing. It really is.
Thanks, Julie. Is that okay, Sophie? Did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you so much. I only had one little comment. Thank you so much, Julie, for that, and to the panel. I only had one little comment about, I guess, like something like, I'm not sure how it would work, but some sort of interim thing. I'm just literally creating this in my mind, but the power of Uber in our metropolitan cities, and whether that's a possibility in our regional areas where you do
absolutely
that. At least the carpooling whilst you're waiting to get the bus and the.
So definitely,
yeah.
So point-to-point transport has been expanding into regional New South Wales, but it is a commercial business model. So they go where they can make money.
Yeah, of course.
We have supported, or government has supported trials of car sharing in places like Orange, where they have agreed to subsidise it to a certain level by getting state government employees work locally to use those vehicles. So reduce government fleet, use those shared vehicles during the week, so then the shared vehicles are available. So they're subsidising the model. There's no reason, other than we haven't done it yet, that you could look at those sort of subsidised models elsewhere, because in some, you build it or you provide it, and they will come. So
okay, well, I'm going to cut that one off, but I've allowed a bit more for regional because most of the other questions are more metro based. So here's one for you, Adam, coming up, just letting you know. It's to do with effective workplace interventions. And the question really, and this is for Madeline, it relates to the extent to which there could be a financial support to run TDM workplace interventions. And the question is, would this incentivize workplaces to implement their own interventions? She then goes on to say, how much money should we be chipping in to achieve this? Now, I think I've interpreted the question correctly, but Madeline, if you wanted to add anything and then ask Adam to answer it. So it's to do with financial incentives linked to employers.
Thanks, David. You've covered it pretty well. Over to you, Adam.
Yep. Kind of semi-loaded question with a couple of points to it. My initial thoughts are, in terms of incentivising the private sector, I think of, and maybe it's a poor analogy, but the shift of our economy away from coal. There was lots of things people did in a policy sense that and public debates to try and drive it, but at the end of the day, I think that what we saw was that the private sector started to realise the sustainability benefits and the need to shift in the long term, and so they made that change. I feel like in the transport sense and sustainable travel behaviours, we're getting towards that tipping point as well, where I think that increasingly the desire of a proponent, and our team says this all the time, to have a sustainable campus that they're moving their workforce into in terms of travel is already there. Their desire to have green travel plans for workforce and for servicing is already there. So I think we're moving to a point where incentives will be less required. Where I think small incentives at the moment still have a place is in demonstration projects and trialling behaviours and trying to establish a proof use case in a particular workforce or particular organisation or a particular place. I think that's still got value, because the power of those use cases to then, tell stories and propagate value, I think is something maybe we don't always consider well. And the final thing is, how much is right. At the end of the day, if it delivers value, and again, this is not a policy view, if something delivers value and a public benefit, governments will usually find a way to make an appropriate level of investment. Now, what's appropriate? That's really hard to say. But if you're delivering value and a public benefit, a government will invest.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, let's move on now. This is for Kurt. Bettina has a question for you to do with, her comment is, to begin with, timetables the last thing you want to think about when navigating a city like Sydney. And she cites other places in the world where public transport timetables are unknown to city travellers. And the question is, will TDM in the future be able to influence customer behaviour to the extent of not using public transport timetables at all?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a good question, and obviously there's, from a customer's benefit, the perspective, the benefit of not having to even consult with a timetable, and more or less be able to utilise a turn up and go style service with a set sort of headway is certainly, I think there is a model, a business model for that, and certainly I think that strategically we're looking at options around that with a number of the modes that we're running. I just don't think that but to be honest, we do that to an extent with bus, in terms of the way that we manage some of our services as it relates to that. But I think that there's going to be there's going to be a set period of time, I think, before we can sort of get there. Information and technology to enable that is obviously very, very important. Being able to provide customers effectively with reliable and accurate real-time information of the services in terms of their location and ETA is pivotal in that type of model. Yeah, I know in the transport planning perspective, and we've been working closely with Adam and his team, particularly during COVID. There's a lot of factors to consider related to that.
Okay, this is a combination question from a number of people, including Hayley and Dave, and it's to do with how we can protect the loss to the car of people that previously used public transport. And so it's to do with what sort of messaging or what sort of strategies do we need to start thinking about in order to try and avoid the loss of people to the car, which we're starting to see at the moment. Really, that's open to any of you. If you'd like to comment, I might throw it open. Who would like to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, and I touched on it earlier when I was speaking today. Confidence in public transport is really crucial, and I think that we've had foundations in place to give people confidence, and that's around the capacity guidance, that's around the cleaning regimes, and I mentioned earlier the challenge that we have, and I mean in a positive way, of sustaining the clean regime around public transport, because it is one of the key elements. I do think with Delta, the question of air supply and air ventilation is one that lots of people ask about, and that is not an easy one to take direct action on when you have a fleet as massive and diverse as we do. So I guess I effectively don't see changes to ventilation in vehicles as a viable, financially viable part of the solution, which means it's got to be a clean, safe distance, good work practices for our staff, and potentially some public health order requirements that will linger in terms of mask usage for customers. I think customers on public transport will be wearing masks for quite some time.
Okay, would anybody else like to say anything? It's quite a broad question. I know John's been doing a lot of work on public transport messaging.
Just a quick comment, David. I think the key message, and of course it can only be made when from an operator and authority perspective, we're satisfied that everything possible has been done. The key message needs to be public transport is safe, because that builds the confidence that the customer is looking for, that Adam referred to. And I still very clear memories of watching broadcasts from Boris Johnson, where he was saying, "Do not use public transport." And just in those few words, there was a tremendous impact. And being flight of foot as well, where we can be, another point that Adam's just made about ventilation, because we know more about Delta. I read a piece a little while ago suggesting that public transport was as dangerous as going to a nightclub from a crowding perspective. So we need to factor in the COVID safe measures and the COVID safe messaging.
Okay, Julie.
I was just going to say, from a longer term perspective, so in future transport, where I mentioned we're sort of looking at sort of that, one of the benefits from COVID has been people spending more time in their local neighbourhoods. So I think what we're trying to do is sort of look to getting public transport users for life. Children that can travel around there locally independently will continue to do so. If they're not always used to being in a car and driven everywhere, if they're used to walking to school or getting traveling by bicycle or using public transport, they tend to continue using those modes. So certainly in inner areas in Sydney, we're seeing a decline in licence holding amongst younger people. So there is things that we can potentially look at doing longer term that could help that longer term shift.
Okay, thank you. I'm starting to realise that a few of the questions are all related to this last discussions, but I'm going to move on to another one that's slightly different, and this is from Dave Surplus. And once again, it's open to all of you. We know that working from home has had a revolutionary impact, they're his words. And I guess the question is, and it's partly linked to what we've been talking about in the last 2 days, what does the panel think are other major social changes underway that could be the next catalyst for change over the next decade? In other words, and it can be, spatial issues, it can be attitudes, it can be opinions, it can be anything you want to talk about. Just give us a flavour of what you think are going to be some of the other demand drivers that could be correlated with working from home, but could be standouts in their own right.
I'll jump in. I think technology has such great potential to solve so many of the problems that we're grappling with. So, my team has just developed a road user space allocation policy, which, if we were implementing it now, is a very manual process to implement. But over time, technology can really enable us to use that much better. So we can, dedicate, lanes on roads for public transport or for freight or for, it's cycling at this particular times of the day, or parking at other times, parklets at other times. So I think, and in terms of the sustainability piece, the better information that people have to enable them to make transport choices. Technology has just such an amazing ability to be embedded across everything we do. And technology is not really just a thing in itself anymore. It's very much part of everything we do. And we're looking at use cases for the technology to solve. So we come up with the problem, and then we try and identify the technology that could support us to get there. So whether it's sustainability or whatever our outcome is that we're trying to look for, tech can help us there.
Any other comments? Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. It's quite a challenge, of course, is that we've often heard say that we don't want to turn back to the bad old days of pre-COVID with crowding on public transport, congestion on the roads, and all these sort of things. And really the question is, and we've discussed this over the last 2 days, the challenges in smoothing the peaks, or the camel humps, as I call it, or getting rid of the humps in our networks as mobility starts to recommence. So how can we avoid a return to the bad old days, what do we need to do to encourage better practices in terms of the performance of the network?
I think I'm happy to go. I think advocacy is really important. And I take everybody on this call as an advocate, and you have a growing, I think we've got to grow the understanding of the issue and a willingness of people, you know, not just within transport, but within, I guess, the industry that sits around transport planning and transport thinking, that's universities, academia, you know, transport consultancies, to understand the benefits, because it's influence at 1,000 micro levels and 1,000 conversations around businesses and how a business sets itself up and how they have their way of working to encourage flexibility around work practices. I think that's a really meaningful way. So being an advocate and not being afraid to speak up about the benefits is a really important piece. I think most social changes or policy changes start with a conversation that comes out of people advocating.
Okay. I'm just wondering if that's enough of an incentive to get people to change their behaviour, but fingers crossed. John, were you going to say something?
Just, I mean, I think we, just as we're, you know, have grown to appreciate that that working from home can work and does work for many. So I think, you know, just having a greater flexibility in the management of our activities seems to be perhaps more acceptable than it was before, and we're less likely to kind of rigidly adhere to a you know, Monday to Friday 9 till 5. Now, of course, some people will throw their hands up in horror, and I think that alludes to the, gosh, can we just get back to what it was before? But of course, it wasn't really just like that for everybody beforehand. But I think being in, you know, I think perhaps from an employee-employer perspective, the idea that having a conversation about flexible time management, flexible working arrangements is something that will become much more normal, is surely a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that employer-employee interface, which has come out as very supporting with working from home, is where a lot of the advocacy leads to good outcomes, where employers now are also saying, we want our employees not to have to put up with that crowding and stuff like they used to before, just enough to make a difference, and it only takes 5%. I'm going to finish with a really curly question to all of you. It's the sort of one we like to finish with. So you've been, forget about the politics and don't let that bias your view. You've been given $1 billion, $1 billion to invest in TDM initiatives. Would you hazard a guess as to which ones you would really want to put your money on in terms of delivering value for money? Now, I'm going to ask each of you. I'll start with Julie then.
Lucky me. I guess maybe that's a really good question. For me, I think it's about creating choice. I think that's where I see there's, and I guess, you know, I take a longer term view than Kurt and Adam, because that's just the space that I work in. But yeah, I think I would come back to that discussion we sort of had that Sophie raised about creating choice for people. So whether, you know, a lot of people don't have the choice to use public transport, and I think that's where we really need to make a difference, or make the difference in terms of not using public transport, but using you know, active and cycling, e-mobility and those sorts of things. So I think you know, coupled with, you know, timetables throughout the day that are consistent throughout the day. So it sends a message that it's, if, you know, all the services aren't in the peaks anymore, they're spread across the day, which makes it, I guess, sends that signal that travelling at any time of the day is important. or on the weekends, and that, you know, not everyone works a 9-to-5 job in an office. There's lots of people that work, you know, 7 days on shifts and things like that. We have this very blinkered view that everyone gets on the train and travels to the city, and that's just not the case. So.
That's great. I do like the answer. That's a good one, and I'm looking forward to progress on that. John.
Okay, well, my answer, and I may not need the full billion, David, so this would be value for money. I would like to see all employers, large and small, but I'll pick on the university and its community of 60,000 people, including a dedicated component on sustainable travel planning as part of everybody's onboarding activity when they join the institution. Maybe you do it already in Transport for New South Wales, I don't know, but we haven't got there yet.
All right, well, that won't cost much, so you've got plenty left over to give to Julie. Good. Good. Oh.
Sorry, David. Yeah, listen, I might be somewhat biased, but I'd invested in technology rather than potentially infrastructure solutions. I think you probably get more bang for buck in terms of being able to improve your situational awareness around the way that your services are using, and to create a more accessible network to our customers as well, particularly in regional and rural areas. I know it was touched before, but being able to provide our customers in those areas with contemporary ways of being able to access and pay for those services, and provide them with an integrated experience as well, so as to reduce some of the barriers associated with their usage, and ultimately being able to provide a consistent and personalised experience for customers should they opt in for that. So that we can ultimately develop a bit more of a two-way interaction and relationship with our customers, so that we can proactively inform them and notify them of certain things and triggers, so as to help inform and shape their travel behaviours, all through technology is where I was.
Good, thanks for that. It's another way of saying we want to make better use of the capacity we've got, the physical capacity. So I like your answer. It's great. Adam, the last but not least.
Well, I think Julie's spot on, actually. We're all kind of betraying the part of the organisation we work in, and it's a good thing we all have the different perspectives coming to it, because I went straight to the way we operate services today, and wouldn't need $1 of your billion, but I'd shift everything that we operate at the moment to less peaky service delivery modes and a more consistent all-day frequent network. And I'd invest the money in supporting places that were impacted by that in a negative way through kind of a structural change or a transitional change. You know, where the businesses that the Sydney CBD is the one that leaps out as it would need to go through some radical change if it was having workers arrive in a less peaky way as they used to pre-COVID. And I think that's going to need to happen anyway in the Sydney CBD over time. So I think the all-day frequent network, it would actually potentially be cheaper for us to operate. It becomes a simpler beast to run and to manage, and it's potentially scope within there as well for it still to meet the demands and the needs of customers out there, provided there was some change at a societal level to the way we move around. But it's pretty aspirational, to be honest.
Well, that's great. No, we're almost done with 4:30. I was just going to say, as I listened to the comments and the responses and the questions, it still seems to me that the gorilla in the room is taming the car. And a lot of the things we're talking about, we talked about 10 years ago, and even 10 years before that. And dare I say 10 years before that, I've been around too long. And of course, the topic that we're not discussing today, because our politicians don't like it, is road pricing reform. And that's for another day. But having said all that, we've now come to the end of what's been a wonderful 2 days I've certainly learnt a lot as well. I've been very excited to participate the whole time. And I'm going to pass back to John, but give my personal thank yous to especially Susie and Dave for suggesting and supporting this initiative in the beginning, and for John for doing such a great job in orchestrating it. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much,